Welcome to Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. The business of audio is booming around the world as well as in Malaysia. Who hasn't heard of Fits.fm, Light FM, and Mix FM? We're talking about a reach or a nationwide reach of over 90% here in this country. Joining me in the studio is my colleague, Kenny Ong, who has just joined the Astro family earlier in the year. How are you, Kenny?
Very good. Thank you, Ibrahim. It's wonderful to be here. I'm very grateful to be here with you.
It's a bit strange to join a new company during the pandemic. Talk to us through that journey. Are you settling down well?
I think it's strange for anybody, even right now, even if you've been with the company for a long time. You know, you're 99% in the office, now suddenly you're working from home. But for me, joining, I think two things. One is joining a new company during a pandemic about 9 months ago, and never really had the time to really meet up with my own team and our announcers and people like that and partners. So it's a little bit more unique in the way that trying to establish relationships. So everything's online, you make a phone call. So that's one thing. And of course, joining, for me, radio is a new industry. I just came in. There are pros and cons to that. And one of the things is trying to learn about the radio industry during a pandemic. So it makes it a little bit more complicated than usual. But I'm enjoying it because radio is fun.
Yeah.
Content is fun. I mean, Astro as a culture is really, really fun. There's a lot of content, a lot of innovation. So for me, I think it's interesting to be joining in such an era for many of us and trying to learn a lot of new stuff.
Fantastic. We want to also learn a little bit more about your knowledge of the industry. Yes, radio might be new to you, but because of your background with music and many other places, how do you think the trend of audio has been like, and what is it going to be like for 2022 onwards?
Okay, for that, about the trend, I'll need to take you a little bit back back 20, 25 years ago. So in those days when we talk about audio, right, the term didn't exist yet, but most of us, when we want to listen to something, the two major trends were radio, which is linear broadcast, and you pick that up and you hear people talk and stories, and even way back then was like things like rediffusion and all this, which is on the wall and you listen to it. So that's the linear kind. And on the other side, which is the so-called physical on demand. So you're talking about cassette tapes, you're talking about vinyl, you're talking about CDs. So those are what we call on demand because you buy that and then you listen to it. So those two trends have always been the predominant audio trends in the world and also for Malaysia. But if you look at how technology has come, the CD part has gone, the vinyl part has gone, and it's taken over by what we call music streaming in essence. Radio still exists as the linear format where people listen to. So both these are still around in terms of audio. It's just that the type of content change. It's like in those days where you didn't have YouTube, everything was just broadcast TV. But now because of YouTube, you have what we call micro content. Same with radio and music. So micro content for radio, the trend now is podcasts, which is the main thing. So some people would like to listen to something for 2 hours, but some just 15 minutes or 5 minutes. So the trend has been moving from people, instead of just listening linear the whole day, they pick and choose, but they pick it up on different formats. So they listen 1 hour on radio, they pick up 15 minutes on podcasts, they listen to music streaming, and they come back to radio. So that's the trend that's moving around.
The issue is also behavioral changes, right?
Yes.
I'm so used to on-demand listening.
Yes.
I mean, I listen to countless hours of podcasts. Every time I'm home, every time I'm walking, every time I'm exercising around the house. It's like a thing for me.
Yes.
But every so often I switch to radio, and sometimes it's so strange. Something I heard that was interesting was being broadcasted. And I find myself habitually trying to repeat the thing or replay back the last 15 seconds, and I catch myself,
Yes.
okay, this is radio. Do you feel that is going away in terms of linear listening, or do you think that no matter what, people are still going to be able to go on with that?
Well, for one, based on, again, just trends for the past 20, 25 years, even up to now that you see pandemic, digital, there's still going to be two kinds of listening, active and passive. So when you're trying to listen to, like, for example, a podcast for 50 minutes, you're paying attention, that's active. When you're playing music and you select your favorite playlist for 10 songs, that's active, right?
Yeah.
But even that, active listening, if you look at the total population of people who are listening in audio, active listening is still not a very high proportion. Most people listen are based on passive. So even if so-called the music streaming services today, a lot of people just listen passively to a playlist that has been generated by a company or a friend who shared the playlist, and they just play it and switch it on and just let it play in the background or just listen to it. Radio is similar. So there are some people who listen to radio based on active listening. That means they listen to the news or they listen to the top 10 charts. You know, but most of the time when people listen to radio for two things. One is passive. They just want a very familiar voice when they have announcers talking in the back. Their favorite announcers that they follow, music that they know suits their style. That's passive. They just want it there and they, you know, let it flow. The other kind of passive listening for radio is to ensure that they have something that, you know, to the mood that they want. So for example, if I want to be in an upbeat mood, I want to be in a happy mood, for us, most people play hits because that's, you know, so if you want something like, for example, the Malay audience will go to Era by default because it's fun, is, you know, the music is uplifting. So that's the kind of mood that they want to be in. So mood-based passive listening is very, very big. And it has nothing to do with I want to choose this song or choose this song.
No,
so
it's
most
just
of the
the
time,
mood.
yeah, it's just the mood. So most of the time when people now listen to is very, very, even for smart speakers, right? If you notice in the US and Europe, for those people who are there, most people with smart speakers don't say, I want to play this song or that song.
Yeah.
They'll tell the smart speaker, play me
something
sad
smooth.
songs because I just had a breakup,
Yeah.
right? So that's passive.
Yeah.
So that trend, and that works very well in favor of so-called linear formats like radio because we represent the mood and we represent what people feel comfortable with.
There is also that customer life cycle element that I want to talk to you about. Growing up, Hits.fm as well as Era has always been my go-to,
Yes.
Even during my university days. In my earlier days, I switched to Mix FM.
Yes.
These days, I listen to Light FM, and prior to starting this interview, I was laughing at myself because, you know, I used to make fun of my parents, you know, listening to Light FM. But as a personal choice, I will never listen to Hits.fm. But I was very surprised that my 14-year-old daughter is now listening to Hits.fm.
Yes.
And it's so strange because I'm like, okay, this customer life cycle thing is real.
Yes.
It really is.
It is.
And because of the market, the domination that you guys have, Astro Radio has, it is really something for everyone, don't you think?
Yeah, I think the way that, again, coming in, one of the things is the privilege of, you know, joining a really, really strong, passionate company like Astro and Astro Radio, where it's not just about it's not just about the stations, it's about how the stations have been created up to today. And if you look at, like, for example, the Malay, the Chinese, and the English stations that we have, they're all, like you said, is by segmentation of the life cycle of people, right? So you have the young audience, then you have the slightly older, then you have the more professional. So you have got that people who go through. So and it's true. Like my daughter is her go-to station for Chinese K-pop music is Go Xuan.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the only thing she listens to. The rest she doesn't even touch.
Yeah.
So and the thing is that she's English educated.
Yeah,
and she listens to Go Xuan, right? Because that, again, that music fits her as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that, you know, the sequence of music there, you know, is something that suits her from a passive listening standpoint when she studies, stuff like that. So it really does follow. And if you notice, some of us, like I used to listen to hits, but my go-to at one time became mix, and now it's like same as you. So it has actually gone through, and for many people, it has been the same thing. So it goes through one
big loop.
cycle, yeah.
We'll go for one short break. When we come back, we'll discuss the latest and most exciting event that is currently happening with Astro Radio, which is called Syok. We'll be right back after these messages. Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me my colleague in the studio, Kenny Ong, the CEO of Astro Radio. Kenny, let's talk about Syok.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's go with a big picture. What is Syok all about? And then let's deep dive into the nitty-gritty parts of it.
Okay. So again, thanks to the foresight of Astro and Astro Radio before this, right? So Syok was launched in 2019 before I joined. And Syok was launched about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And it was the first ever Malaysian radio ecosystem that actually integrated all stations in one app. So at that point in time, prior to 2019, all the Malaysian radio apps, whoever created them, were individual apps. So in the past, we used to have an Era app, we used to have a Hits app, and et cetera, et cetera. But in 2019, Astro Radio made a decision to integrate everything into Syok, into one app. And that was the first that any Malaysian radio stations did, and
Yeah.
then the rest followed us. So that's 2019, and because of that, it became a very, very powerful ecosystem for listeners because they could find out what other stations were playing. For example, if they're ERA, they sometimes will change to Sina and then change to Gegar, etc., etc. And they will also be able to find new stations like Zayan. Before this, you know, if it's just frequency, they will not be able to find Zayan, right?
Yeah.
But because of the app, we have people who are from Sina who listen and then they explored and they found Zayan and they liked it. And some of them moved on to English stations. So I think as a digital ecosystem, Syok was for that. And within Syok, we also started articles and videos. But the most powerful investment that Syok did in 2019, way back then, was in podcasts, when that term was still very new and nobody knew what it was. And we started podcasting in 2019 with some titles, especially those from our morning segments. For example, on the ERA Breakfast Show or Hits Breakfast Show, the Chinese station or Raga. And we captured those in podcasts and then put them as like a catch-up thing for Syok. And it took off, and people listened to it because people wanted to catch up to what they missed in the morning. And they just like to listen to the banter of people in the evening because they couldn't catch it in the morning. So podcast took off and then more original titles came in. And then because of that, that was the history of Syok up to today. Now, so fast forward to what we have just done. 1st November.
Literally 2-3 days ago.
Yeah, literally 2-3 days ago.
Yeah.
So between the time that I joined, we wanted to transform the whole ecosystem of what we call radio and audio, right? And Syok happens to be one part of the transformation. It's a key component, it's a digital component. But the way that we look at radio and audio is quite different. We don't look at them as silos, FM stations or digital. We look at everything as integrated. For example, if you're a listener for ERA, you follow them on radio in a car. You may move to the social media. You go to YouTube. You may go to Syok. So it's still the same listener, but it depends on what you want to listen to throughout the day. So what we have built is an ecosystem that connects everything and try to make everybody stay within the listeners, be entertained within one ecosystem. And Syok is a digital ecosystem that we have built. So Syok for us is not just an app. It's actually a platform for us to grow the whole audio industry. And that's where we're driving. So Syok was launched in 1st November. And we made a lot of changes to it. We had a lot of new things to it to make sure that it meets the demands of the new generation.
So I'm sorry to ask, it might sound like a silly question. When you say to grow the audio industry or radio industry, does it mean that you guys are open for collaborations for non-Astro players as well?
Actually, we are having them on board after 1st November. So up to 1st November is what we call the first phase, where it's all internal. So between November to next year, January to March, you will find other non-Astro partners coming in to Syok for different content.
Now this is basically in tandem with that discovery phase that you're talking about just now, Zayan.
Yes.
As a listener, I want to go for other options as well. If I'm being served the same menu every day, I might be happy, but at the same time, I want to try something new as well. But one other area that I want to focus on is, of course, what you touched upon earlier just now on content. So distribution and platform, one area. Content. How has content changed, in your opinion? Do you feel that talk radio is going to be a big deal in Malaysia moving forward? We can't escape the big elephant in the room. BFM is a highly popular radio station. I was an alumni of that place.
Yes.
But knowing BFM, the reach wasn't that great in terms of audience capacity.
Yes.
It's still located mostly in Klang Valley. They've tried to see if they can grow their reach. But the issue here is whether or not, in general, talk radio is going to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be business. It can be sports. It can be politics. It can be so many other things. But what's the direction of content, in your opinion, other than listening to music and all the other entertainment elements there?
Okay, this is where it's interesting from where I came from. So I came from a music record label, global, the #1 in the world. And the game that we had was just streaming content, right? So it's global streaming, everything to do with music and podcast streaming. That's the world that I came from. So it's a 100% digital streaming world. What we have learned for the past couple of years and moving now into Astro and taking that learning is that the term and the way that people consume content is very different from, again, 10, 15 years ago. In the past, it's an is usually what we call mutually exclusive. That means
Yeah.
if I consume this, I don't consume this. If I buy this CD, I don't buy this CD. But the era of OTT, not just for video, but for audio, and digital streaming has made it such that we are in an era of what we call total consumption. That means there's no such thing as I buy this, I don't buy this. Or I listen to this and I don't listen to this. So that's where I think back in those days, there's this theory of what we call the long tail, the niche, right? So you will find 80% of the population listening to small genres,
Yeah.
but cumulatively they make up 80%.
Yeah, the area under the curve is
of
bigger than the
everything.
20%.
So that is the era that we're living in now. So it's very different from in those days where music record companies will say, okay, I want to focus on pop. So out of 10 singers that I sign, 9 will be pop singers because that's where my money is made. But today, that doesn't hold water anymore. Because each of them will have, you will have signed your 100 singers that you sign. One will be in hip hop, one will be in classical, one will be, because the way that we consume, even I think as well as if you ask the new generation, like your daughter or my children, they don't, the thing is that genres don't exist anymore. This is what people don't realize. Genres were created.
You mean genres like pop, rock, ballad, whatever?
The new
jazz.
generation don't even care what genres they are listening to because
Wow.
the word genre and all these times, if you can remember those days, right? It was created during the days of tapes, record tapes and CDs. It's a way for people to find the CD when they go into a shop.
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I
like
want,
a bookstore lah.
Yes.
Horror, whatever.
Yes, that's the best way I can fit certain product there.
Yeah, that's right.
But that in the streaming world has gone, right?
Yeah.
There's no such, so music in general, there's no such thing as a genre anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
If the way that people consume. So those people who talk about very strict in terms of, like you said, in terms of certain category of things like a talk radio or something like this, that notion of those genres or those categories happen to be the discussion points of people who belong to the previous generation, like myself, like yourself.
Yeah.
But if you talk to the new people, they really don't care whether it's a news or whatever. They tune into whatever they want to at that point in time. So that's the power of on demand. So the power of streaming is not about whether like you say, BFM is the #1 talk show or whatever the case. It's whether or not throughout the day I spend half an hour on talk, half an hour on music, half an hour on silence, half an hour on just instrumental, half an hour. So so now it's the power of niche and the power of sub-genres. Yeah. And some things that you can't even fit them into proper categories.
Yeah. It does look like it. I mean, you can only classify so much items, right?
Yes.
But this also opens up that idea of experimentation. You can actually, with the platform like Syok, you can actually try to experiment what works, what doesn't.
Yes.
Do you feel that experimentation phase is going to come very soon, or it's already happening right now?
That's the thing that we did with the new Syok. So as our first, so we previously Syok, when I came into here, we had like 26 radio stations on Syok, right? So we had the 11 core brands that you find on FM, and then we have what we call the substations that we created, like Hit Sabah, Hit Sarawak, My Sabah, and all this. And we also had a few stations like rock and stuff like that. So those were the early experimentations that we had. So as of 1st November, the new Syok that we launched, we actually simultaneously launched 60 new online channels. So we actually have 85. Wow. So we are the first in Malaysia to launch that many channels at one go. One day. So, so 60 new channels. And how does the 60 new channels work? It actually works on what people listen to that we picked up. And is internally we call it splinters, right? So for example, we have this thing called the era hip hop or era flow. So as a DNA, it still follows the era DNA. But in this channel, there's nothing except local hip hop. Oh. So that's one of the channels, right? So we have a Zayan channel, a sub channel now, or a splinter channel in Zayan, for nothing except Nasheed songs. So if you don't want to listen to anything, you listen to Zayan Nasheed. If you only want Nasheed songs. Yeah. So we have a Chinese station, Melody, right, that only plays the 80s, 90s songs because that's the genre that the karaoke days. Those were the early karaoke days. So it's like a karaoke genre. So people who listen to that station will only listen to karaoke songs. And then we have a station for era and Goshen and hits as well that only plays nothing except K-pop, because that's what people want to listen to, right? So we have a hits K-pop station, 24 hours is just K-pop music, nothing else. but it's programmed by our same era music people and announcers, and it works the same way. But then it won't have other genres except K-pop.
So how does this tie with that non-mutual exclusivity idea that you shared just now?
Yes.
Does this mean that people are going to listen to Syok, in your opinion? I mean, get into the car, open the app, listen to Syok, and then Bluetooth the car? Or do you feel that they're still going to touch the radio and then go for FM eventually? How does that mix go about, in your opinion?
It depends on what people are comfortable with, right? So I think one thing about radio is very habitual.
Yeah.
So even if I'm a very digital native, using mobile phones and Bluetooth sometimes, but the habit for most people, even if they are digital native, they go into a car, they will still turn on and press the number and they go to the dial. So it's fine. Like I said, for us, it's not mutually exclusive. That means FM and digital is not a separate thing. To us, it's all in one ecosystem. We're just looking at the listener journey point of view. So if you are very focused on just FM, that's where we also continue to build our content, we build our marketing, we build publicity around FM. And it's still a very powerful medium. 94% of Malaysians still listen to radio, FM, whether in the car or in the house. So that remains.
That number still staggers me, 94%. It's like Google for search business, it's like, that's huge.
Yes.
What's then going to think? You're going to think about attrition rate, or you're going to think about some challenges or crises that might come your way. What would be the biggest threat, so to speak, for the business of radio? Not just Astro Radio, but the industry as well.
I think if you look at the more advanced technological innovations in other countries, right? The thing that affects radio the most will be two things. One is high-speed internet, right? That means if you cover the whole of Malaysia, and I mean the whole of Malaysia, right, including East Coast and Sabah, Sarawak, every small pockets with 4G at least and 5G, then there might not be a need for FM. Because then everybody, but even that you have to pay for data. So FM is still free, and it's still so it's very hard to balance that. But I'm talking about in a world where there's 100% perfect 4-5G coverage. That's the first track. But in every country I've seen, even the very, very advanced countries, if you talk about like the US and the UK, where digital is strong, but a healthy listening is still through FM, because you can't get digital everywhere. High-speed internet is not available in all locations. So that's the first thing. So as we move, we try to balance the two, and that's why we are still very, very focused on FM as we continue to build digital.
Yes.
So it's unlike other...
To mitigate that very real risk that you mentioned. What about partnering with the video content on top of the audio content? We've seen how Hits.fm kind of pioneered this, I don't know, late 90s actually, if you think about it, right? Is that something of a possibility on Syok?
Yeah, actually Syok has a video component to it, and we do have what we call exclusive videos on Syok, plus video content that we take from AWANI, and stuff like that, and we do put it there. Yeah. So we do produce our own videos, we have our own team, and then we take videos from all the sister channels that we have. Plus now, again, we are going to be bringing in partners that have unique videos from outside the Astro ecosystem that we'll be putting into Syok as well.
Fantastic. One more short break before we conclude our conversation with Kenny Ong of Astro Radio. Thanks for staying on. I have with me Kenny Ong, my colleague at Astro Radio. Kenny, let's talk about what you listen to on your app. What's moving the needle for you?
Okay, for me, because of two things, right? One is personal, one is because of the job. Because of the job, I actually listen to all the stations.
You're the only person on this planet that has to listen to radio because it's your job. Can you believe it?
Yeah, I keep telling people I have like a dream job, right? So people ask me what's my job description. I say, this is my job description.
It's like,
I listen to music.
What do you call this? A game tester, you play a game because it's your job. Yeah.
Yes, so I have a dream job, because my job, in my job description, is to listen to music and listen to radio. So it's like waking up to something that you love to do every day. So for me, I listen to all the stations, including the Chinese and the Malay and even Raga, just to have a feel of what they are. Yeah. But if you ask me, my go-to stations now would be mixed for English. I'm in the age group where I'm
straddling between
comfortable.
the two.
Yeah. Then the other one for me to keep in touch with what my children are listening to, like I said, it will be Goshen, because it's very, very, very youth. You know, it's one of the, I think in terms of music and DNA, it's one of the youngest field in terms of the music.
Fantastic. Do you feel that the streaming services that also rivals what we're offering right now at Astro, do you feel that that might be an issue moving forward, or you're going to see things as complementary as per usual? As you mentioned, nothing is mutually exclusive these days.
Yeah, that was the point that I wanted to also make. Again, in those days where you still have radio, and you still have people buying CDs and tapes. See, those people who buy CDs and tapes and vinyl don't stop listening to radio, because it's too, right? And radio is one of the best channels for what we call music discovery. I mean, just talking about purely just from music. Most people discover new music from radio. I
agree.
Yeah, so all over the world, even where, like for example, again back in the US or the Europe, where streaming rates are very high, you know, streaming subscription rates are very high, radio is still very strong and is still the #1 channel for music discovery, not the app. So that's the one thing. So people still switch between the two. So that behavior for me will not change. It will be again similar to the days of radio and vinyl and radio and CD. So there will still be two. So I will reckon that the music streaming services will be like the CD days, where you know people will listen and they want certain type of music, they want to create their own playlist. Those are what we call active music users. They will be a category of those. But if you look at the music streaming penetration rate in Malaysia, it's very low. It's below 1%.
Oh wow!
For major subscription service, right?
Wow.
So it's, I think the last time I checked was like 0.7% of the population, even after like 8 years in the country. Yeah, it's still very low because of the fact it's two things. Active music users are actually not that many. That means the people who actively manage their own playlist and actively choose what I want to hear, that segment is actually
near non-existent.
Yeah, it's not as many as what people think. Many people still listen to what we call playlists. Even those who download the so-called music streaming services, still by default go to recommended playlists. That means people curated like 100 songs for them, and just click play and they listen.
You have made my wife very special because she's that type. Actually, she's actually curating. You know. So it's really small, yeah.
So there's always a market for that. It's like those days when we used to do mixtape, when we used to record our own songs into into cassette tapes, right?
Yeah.
They will always be,
and then rewind it.
There will always be that segment. So for us, the entire ecosystem will always remain similar. So there will be active people, passive people. But for us, again, Syok was launched because we want to give more choices, right? So instead of just, like I said, the 11 stations, we are giving them the splinters where you can listen to. In the future, it's not just music. We will have substations like this, you know, for content. So you're talking about talk, and we will have channels and this, right? We are talking to people, like for example, we're going to launch if I can, I'll launch a Feng Shui and Astrology channel. That talks nothing except Feng Shui and Astrology. Right? That's one. AWANI is coming on board soon. So we will have AWANI as a fully featured news talk channel. We will have other channels that that talks nothing except it will just be interviews and talks, or things like that. So that's how we are managing again, niche is the key. Sub-genres will be the key, and we can expand on that. Not just by ourselves, but with partners that we can bring on board. You know, different genres, different languages, different kind of content. Some will be comedy, some will be drama. So
that's right. Yeah, there's so many areas that you can make audio.
And we are working with the Astro TV side to talk about what we call audio dramas. So on top of podcasts, there will be a totally new segment called audio dramas that we're going to be leading the charge for Malaysia. And then you will be back to the days where you don't watch drama, you're going to be listening to drama that you will take from the key TV content like from Astro, right? And then you will then change them and modify them into audio, and you listen to it. Fantastic. So podcast will have its will still continue to grow. So the fastest growing is still podcast.
Of course.
And we are actually, Syok and Astro Radio is the #1 local podcasting platform, right? And we have been growing exponentially the past 2-3 years.
So if people want to learn more about Syok or get the app, how do they go about that?
Okay, so they can go to App Store, Apple App Store. They can go to Huawei App Gallery, Google Play Store. That's how to download the app. But if they don't want the app, they can actually go to the website, syok.my, syok.my, and they can just listen it from their desktops.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kenny. It's a pleasure. I'm going to be talking to you a lot more because it's like audio is the big thing. I mean, people disagree with me. I'm like, no, you gotta really deep dive into the whole business of not just audio per se, but podcast. And there's so many other interesting things that is happening in between. That was my conversation with Kenny Ong, the CEO of Astro Radio. If you missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad. You can also go to the App Store and download Syok right now. I urge you to do that. I just did literally before doing the interview. How naughty am I? I'm supposed to be doing that since the launch. But thank you very much for joining us. Catch you in the next one.